If you go through Nirvana's studio albums in chronological order, you'll find that as time went on, the guitar sounds got more experimental. Bleach has a straightforward guitar sound. Every song has distortion on the entire time, with the exception of About a Girl. In Nevermind, the guitars got much more dynamic and varied. Kurt Cobain introduced the Electro-Harmonix small clone to his setup, which gave us many iconic watery sounds, a few being Come As You Are and the verses of Smells Like Teen Spirit. When we get to Nirvana's final studio album, In Utero, Kurt's guitar tones got more experimental than they had ever been before. From the slapback of Scentless Apprentice and the chaotic, alien-like squeals of radio-friendly unit shifter. In studio, Kurt achieved these album-defining sounds with an Electro-Harmonix Echo Flanger, while live on the In Utero tour, he used an Electro-Harmonix Polychorus to bring these sounds to the stage. In this video, we'll be breaking down the history of both of these pedals, breaking down Kurt's use of them, and seeing how both runs of the Polychorus stack up against an original vintage Echo Flanger. Electro-Harmonix produced the Echo Flanger from 1977 to 1979. It was designed by the company's founder, Mike Matthews. It's possibly one of the very first multi-effect units of its time, housing chorus, flange, slapback, and filter matrix all in one box. It was unheard of at the time to have 4 effects in one box like that, especially with the range that the Echo Flanger gives you for each one. Sounds that guitarists thought could only be achieved in the studio at the time could now be brought to the stage thanks to this. The Echo Flanger uses the highly sought after SAD 1024 chip. It would go on to be slightly redesigned in 2 other variations that internally are nearly identical. The Polyflange is a rare early variation produced only for 1 year, 1979 to 1980. After that, the Polychorus was released in late 1981 through 1983. As far as I've seen, there isn't really any real explanation or reason as to why Electro-Harmonix did this, essentially selling the same exact pedal under 3 different names and 3 different designs. I've seen people online suggest that simply the Echo Flanger wasn't selling, so this was Electro-Harmonix trying to change up their marketing and branding just by changing the name and the design to see what would stick. So the Echo Flanger, the Polyflange, and the original 80s run of the Polychorus are essentially all the same pedal. They have the SAD 1024 chip, and they all use the same circuit. Electro-Harmonix went out of business in 1983. They stopped making pedals at that time, and in the early 90s they started selling vacuum tubes. But due to high demand and the high prices people were paying for their 70s pedals, Electro-Harmonix reissued their popular older models in the mid-90s, including the Big Muff, the Small Clone, and of course, the Polychorus. This is the first reissue of the Polychorus. It was reissued in the late 90s and it visually looks very similar to the original Polychorus. But there are a few giveaways that will tell you right away if you're looking at a reissue or an original. The biggest difference is that the reissues are stereo, where the original Polychorus is mono. The reissue has a second output, which the original Polychorus does not, and also stereo is above the word poly. The original Polychoruses don't have that. The controls are also in different places. On the original, this function is just called tune, while on the stereo reissues, it's labeled as tune/delay. And just like on the original Echo Flangers, the original Polychorus has a power cable just connected directly to it, where the reissue doesn't have that. It has a separate input on top for power to be plugged into. It takes 24 volts. Of the stereo inputs, each output is a fixed blend of the dry and affected signal, but out of phase with each other. The reissues use the MN3007 chip as opposed to the SAD 1024 like the originals. This is where the difference in sound comes from between the two. It's not necessarily that one is better than the other, it's subjective and a matter of personal opinion, but online I've seen the reissue sound described as hi-fi and the originals as lo-fi. And from playing these two back to back, I would completely agree with that description of them. How I interpret that is that for the hi-fi sound, this does have more highs and it cuts through a little more, where the originals definitely have much more of a mid-low heavy sound, and it is noticeable between the two. It's really surprising to hear that there's that EQ difference between these two, because aside from that, I think that this first reissue does a really good job at getting the sounds of the original. And that brings us to the second reissue, what is known as the Polychorus XO. As is apparent, this looks completely different. They did not go with the classic Polychorus look and redesigned it and made it a smaller pedal. Not trying to knock it down, but when I look at it, I see kind of like a cheap imitation of like the Matrix artwork from those movies, and it kind of makes sense time-wise because in the 2000s, those movies were all the rage. It does have the same functions as the first reissue. The only difference is that the sweep filter on and off is now a knob, where on the first reissue, that is a switch that's on the top. I had a hard time trying to find specific information about these two reissues. There's not a lot out there, but apparently they're supposed to have the same circuit and they both have the same MN3007 chip. So theoretically, from my understanding, these should sound identical and be like the same exact pedal. But from playing these two, they sound pretty different, and I'm not trying to knock on the newer one, but it's just not as good as this one. Where the first reissue can really nail those Nirvana sounds, this one, it gets close, but like not all the way. I'm personally surprised that Electro-Harmonix decided to go this route. Like, of course, they're not trying to sell like a Nirvana pedal, so they're trying to expand and trying to make it better, which I get. They're trying to redesign and make it more efficient. But I can't help but think that a big demographic of who wants this pedal is because of Kurt Cobain. So I think they should have kept the look of the original Polychorus like Kurt used, and just made it sound more like his. Main complaint that I see Nirvana fans talk about this pedal is just visually how different it looks. And even though he's so heavily associated with it, Kurt Cobain actually never owned a Polychorus of his own. He owned an Echo Flanger, and his first documented use of it is at the abandoned In Utero demo sessions in October of 1992. We can hear it on Dumb and Tourette's from that session, and those two, along with many more songs from that session, are on the In Utero 20th anniversary box sets. If you haven't heard those, go check it out, especially Dumb. It's on the entire time on the clean guitar, and it's just an interesting use of that effect for that type of song. They were recording with Bleach engineer and producer Jack Endino, and the session is considered abandoned because they actually got a noise complaint while they were recording. Someone called the cops to say that it was too loud and the sound of the drumming was actually going through the walls of the building. It's funny because Jack Endino has recalled telling the cops, "I have Nirvana in here right now. I'm kind of recording one of the world's biggest bands." And the cops were like, "We don't care who it is, shut it down, it's too loud." And so the session was abandoned. 1 month later, in November of '92, Kurt used his Echo Flanger again to record The Priest, they called him. This is a collaboration he did with poet and writer William Burroughs, where he reads a story that he wrote by the same name, and Kurt is in the background just kind of jamming and improvising and making some crazy sounds with his Echo Flanger, or as Kurt himself put it.
Could you tell us something about getting together with William Burroughs and working on that record? And what he was like?
It was a long-distance recording. I think he had already done his piece. And then at the last minute, we were in Seattle and we were over at Dave's friend's house, Barrett, and he has a little, like a 16 track or something, this little studio. And he just turned the DAT machine on and I just masturbated for about 20 minutes and then sent it to them and they edited it.
The first live use of his Echo Flanger was at the Hollywood Rock Festival in Brazil in January of '93. It's used at a few different times in the show, but a notable time is during Scentless Apprentice with what fans have described as a jet sound. Right before the In Utero sessions, Kurt thought that he had actually broken his Echo Flanger. He called his guitar tech Ernie Bailey freaking out, saying, "This pedal is the entire album, it's got to work." Ernie opened up Kurt's Echo Flanger and found that, funny enough, nothing was wrong or broken, but that Kurt had just bumped the AC switch that turns the pedal on. To quote Ernie regarding this, he said, "It was hilarious because it was such a simple fix. I was able to fix it with a Phillips screwdriver and a pair of pliers, and the level of gratitude was ridiculous. Man, you saved the album." I had to laugh because I was like, man, this is the easiest thing I've ever done. But being that Kurt's Echo Flanger was known to act up, Ernie actually gave Kurt two of his own Polychorus pedals to use. Ernie has said that of the two, he had a nice one that was taken and used at the In Utero sessions, and his beat up one is the one that Kurt took out on tour. So when we see Kurt with a Polychorus, it's not actually his pedal, it's Ernie's pedal that he's borrowing. So at the In Utero sessions in February of 1993, either his Echo Flanger or Ernie's Polychorus is used on Radio Friendly Unit Shifter and Scentless Apprentice. It's funny that beforehand Kurt was freaking out and was telling Ernie, "You gotta fix this, it's the entire album," when it went on to be only used for these 2 songs out of the 12. But granted, those sounds in those songs define them. Like without the slapback in Scentless or the alien sounds in Radio Friendly Unit Shifter, these would not be the same songs. So for those, the pedal was essential. After the In Utero sessions, we continue to see Kurt's Echo Flanger live. We can see it at the Roseland Ballroom and also on Saturday Night Live in September of that year. Kurt used it there for the solo of Heart-Shaped Box. From there, we have the start of the In Utero tour a month later in October of '93, and Kurt is heavily photographed and documented as using the Polychorus. I believe the Echo Flanger was also with him, but it seems like he just opted to use the Polychorus more because he just knew that was more reliable. He also attempted to use it in November on Unplugged, but it was causing too much of a 60-cycle hum, and ultimately it was switched out for the small clone for the taping. Ernie eventually did get his Polychorus pedals back, but for the one that Kurt used live, he had marked his settings with nail polish and also put Velcro on it. Now I will be demoing and putting these 3 pedals head to head, an original 70s Echo Flanger, a 90s stereo Polychorus reissue, and the Polychorus XO. The stereo 90s reissue is mine, and it's one I've had for many years, but the original Echo Flanger and the XO are courtesy of my amazing friend John, who sent them out to me so I could make content like this with them. Again, I have to give John a huge shout out. Thank you so much, man. I don't take for granted your generosity and the trust you put in me by sending these pedals. It's been a lot of fun to play around with them and to create videos like this. It's only been possible because of you. So thank you so much, man. So the main thing I'm trying to show in this demo is the difference between the hi-fi sound of the reissues and the lo-fi sound of the original. That was the thing that took me the most by surprise. So this demo will be broken up into 2 parts. In the first part will be more of a general overview of how the 4 effects sound between the 3 pedals. I tried to set the 3 of them to where the modulation sounds similar and comparable, so you can really hear the differences in the subtleties and the EQ. My first thought for this demo was to have all the pedals function set all at noon, so you could hear it all that way and it could be more like unbiased because they're all at the noon position. But with the XO, things got really crazy and wacky with everything set at noon. It gets like really spacey and like not really comparable to the others, so which is why I decided to do it in this format instead. I will be playing my Jag-Stang that has been modded to Kurt's prototype specs on clean for this section. For the playing of this demo, I decided to do more like clean, delicate style playing because I feel like that way you can see the subtleties and the nuances more, as opposed to power chords with like a big distorted sound. If I try to do it that way, you wouldn't really hear the differences too much, where I think when you play clean and a little more delicately, you can really hear the nuances more. After that, of course, we'll go into the Nirvana section of the demo, where with my Sansamp, we'll be seeing how each pedal does in recreating the 3 sounds that Kurt used on the In Utero tour: radio-friendly unit shifter, Scentless Apprentice, and the Heart-Shaped Box solo. So let me know what you think. When it comes to the first part of the demo, can you hear that hi-fi versus lo-fi EQ difference? And if so, which of the 3 do you prefer? And when it comes to the Nirvana section, how well do you think the 2 reissues stack up to the original for the Nirvana sounds?